All right, let's dive into some Google Play policies that you might not think about every day, but are absolutely critical. We're talking about the new rules for emojis and the very specific requirements for Android Instant apps. We're going to get you completely up to speed. So, you think your app is totally compliant, right? Well, it's a real challenge to keep up, isn't it? The policy world just keeps growing, and it's these little special program rules that can so easily trip up even the most diligent developers. So let's make sure that doesn't happen to you. So here's our game plan. We'll kick things off with the new emoji mandate. Then we'll jump into the essentials for Android Instant apps, covering everything from user experience to the technical stuff happening behind the scenes. And we'll wrap it all up with a quick checklist you can use right away. First up, let's talk emojis. Now, I know it sounds like a small thing, but Google's goal here is actually pretty big. It's all about creating a consistent and inclusive experience for everyone. No more of those frustrating empty boxes where a cool new emoji is supposed to be. And the secret sauce that makes this all work? It's Unicode. You can think of it as the universal translator for emojis. When your app supports the latest version, it guarantees that a thumbs up on your friend's phone actually looks like a thumbs up on your phone, no matter what kind of device you both have. Okay, so this is the part you really need to listen to. It all boils down to one simple question. How does your app handle emojis? If you're just using the standard ones built into Android, hey, great news. On Android 12 and up, the system does all the heavy lifting for you. You're golden. But if you're using your own custom emojis or some third-party library, well then, the ball is in your court.
And if that ball is in your court, it comes with a deadline. You have exactly 4 months. 4 months from the moment a new Unicode version is released to get it supported in your app. So you're definitely going to want to bake that into your development schedule.
All right, let's switch gears and talk about Android Instant apps. These are awesome, right? They're like the try before you buy of the app world, letting users get a taste of your app without a full install. But as you can imagine, that kind of power comes with a very specific rulebook. And this quote from Google really says it all. It's this delicate balancing act. On one hand, the experience has to be delightful and frictionless, so people actually want to use it. But on the other hand, it has to meet the highest standards of privacy and security. Otherwise, nobody will trust it. So let's get into the nitty-gritty with 2 huge rules right off the bat. First, if your Instant app has a login, you have to use SmartLog for passwords. It's not optional. Second, you have to support app links correctly. If a user clicks a link that could open in another Instant app, you have to send them there, not kick them out to a browser. It's all about keeping that experience smooth and seamless. Now, let's focus on the user experience because Google has some really specific rules about how you can ask users to install the full version of your app. And I mean very specific. You have to use the official Material Design Get App icon. The button needs to say install. You can only prompt them maybe 2 or 3 times. And, this is a big one, you can't make it look like a banner ad. The prompt has to feel like a natural, helpful part of the app. And this right here, this is the golden rule of Instant apps. Your Instant app has to provide real value all by itself. It can't just be a glorified advertisement for your full app. It needs to be a useful, functional experience that leaves the user feeling like they got something out of it, even if they never install a thing. Okay, we've covered what the user sees. Now let's pop the hood and look at the technical and security rules. This is the stuff that makes the whole Instant app ecosystem feel safe and trustworthy. Think of your Instant app as a polite guest in someone's home. It can't just start redecorating, right? It can't change the wallpaper or leave stuff on the home screen. The rule is simple. When the user closes the app, it should be like it was never there. No trace left behind. That polite guest rule extends to privacy in a huge way. Instant apps are forbidding from accessing device identifiers that pass a simple 2-part test. 1, does it stick around after the app closes? And 2, can the user reset it themselves? If the answer is yes to the first and no to the second, it's completely off limits. So what kind of identifiers are we talking about? The big ones. Things like the build serial number, MAC addresses, and especially the IMEI or IMSI. Why? Because these are permanent, like a phone's social security number. Using them for tracking would completely shatter the trust that Instant apps are built on. So they are a hard no. This one is short, sweet, and absolutely non-negotiable. Every single bit of data your Instant app sends or receives over the network must be encrypted. Period. We're talking TLS, like HTTPS. It's not a suggestion, it is a hard requirement.
Okay, I know that was a lot to take in. So let's boil it all down into a really simple, actionable checklist that you and your team can use to make sure you're good to go.
Here are your 5 big takeaways. 1. For emojis. If they're custom, put that 4-month update window on your calendar. 2. For instant app logins, just use Smart Lock. 3. For install prompts, stick to the material design playbook, no funny business. 4. For identifiers, stay away from anything persistent and non-resettable like IMEI. And finally, number 5, encrypt all your network traffic, always.
And that really brings us to the final thought. When you look at these policies together, you see a clear pattern, right? Google is focusing more and more on these tiny details, these micro policies that have a huge impact on user privacy and experience. So it really begs the question, what's the next small detail that's about to become a major policy update? It's definitely something we should all be thinking about. Thanks so much for tuning in.
If you're a developer for Google Play, you know that amazing feeling of hitting publish. But you also know that it's an ecosystem with a, let's say, complex set of rules. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on those policies and the whole enforcement process. We'll break down what really happens when you get one of those emails from Google.
You know the one I'm talking about. It's the notification that makes your stomach drop. An email from the Google Play team about a policy violation. All of a sudden, your app's entire future feels like it's on the line. What does it mean? What are you supposed to do next? Well, that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to walk through that journey right now.
Okay, first things first. You've got to understand that Google Play isn't just a big app store. It's an ecosystem. And according to Google's own rules, that entire system is built on one simple but incredibly powerful idea: user trust. Seriously, every single rule we're about to talk about is designed to protect that trust.
And here's the thing you have to get your head around. These policies are incredibly broad. We're not just talking about the code in your app. Nope. They cover your store listing, your developer name, the ads you show, even the third-party libraries or SDKs that you use. The bottom line from Google is crystal clear. You are responsible for everything. And believe me, the consequences for getting it wrong can be severe.
So, how in the world does Google keep an eye on millions of apps? Well, it's not some single person in a cubicle or just one big scary bot. It's a whole complex, multi-layered system that's designed to automatically spot problems and then, when it needs to, flag them for a real human to review.
The first line of defense, and probably the system you'll hear about most, is Google Play Protect. Just think of it like Google's own built-in automated security guard for the whole platform. It's always on, always working in the background, trying to keep everyone and everything safe.
And you can see how it works right here. Play Protect scans apps when you install them, it scans your device from time to time, and it can take action. Everything from just sending a warning all the way to automatically disabling or even removing a bad app right off a user's phone, no questions asked. It's a really powerful automated shield.
But, and this is important, it's not just about the bots. Google is very clear that trained human analysts are a huge part of this process. They're the ones who step in to look at the tricky stuff, the apps where context really matters, making those nuanced calls that an algorithm might just get wrong. And then whatever they find gets fed back into the system to make the automated parts even smarter.
All right, so what happens when a violation is actually found? The best way to think about it is like an enforcement ladder. Each rung you go up represents a more serious action with bigger and bigger consequences for both your app and your developer account.
So, down at the bottom of the ladder, we've got rejection and removal. A rejection is basically a stop sign for a new update you're trying to publish. It's annoying, but your current live app is totally fine. A removal, though, is more serious. That means your live app gets pulled from the store. Now, a single removal won't tank your account right away, but if it becomes a pattern, yeah, that's not good.
Okay, now we're taking a big step up the ladder. Let's look at the difference between a removal and a suspension. With a removal, you can fix your app and try again. A suspension is a whole different ballgame. This is for really serious or repeated problems. You can't reuse that app's package name ever again. And here's the real kicker. A suspension counts as a strike against your account. This is where things start to get really dangerous.
And right at the very top of that ladder, account termination. This is it. Game over. All of your apps are removed, your account gets shut down, and as this quote straight from the policy says, any new account you try to open will just get terminated too. There is no coming back from this one.
So let's just put it all together. This table is basically your cheat sheet for that whole enforcement ladder. You can see it all at a glance. It goes from a simple rejection with no real account impact all the way down to termination, which, well, closes the door for good. If you're going to remember one thing, this is probably it.
I know, after looking at that ladder, things can feel a little grim. But look, getting an enforcement notice doesn't always have to be the end of the road. There is a path forward, especially if you think a mistake was made.
And that path is the appeals process. The steps are pretty straightforward. First, take a breath and actually read the email carefully. Understand the specific policy they say you violated. Then, if you've looked at it and you truly believe the decision was a mistake, you can follow the instructions to submit an appeal. If Google agrees there was an error, they'll reinstate your app.
Of course, the absolute best way to deal with a violation is to not get one in the first place, right? So for this last part, let's talk about the proactive things you can do to stay in good standing right from day one.
It all starts with the basics of your account, just getting your house in order. That means finishing all the verifications and picking the right account type. For example, if you're an organization, you're going to need a DUNS number, which is just a unique code that helps Google verify you're a real business. Keeping all your info current isn't optional, it's essential. Think of this as the foundation for a healthy developer account.
And here's one that can really trip developers up, the dormant account policy. If your account just sits there inactive for a long time, you're not publishing anything, not updating apps, Google might actually close it to prevent it from being abused later. The message here is pretty clear. Google Play is for active developers.
You know, when you think about it, with all the automated systems, human reviewers, hundreds of pages of policy, it all comes down to this number, 1. Because at the end of the day, there is only one person who's ultimately responsible for making sure your app and your account are totally compliant with all the rules. And that person is you.
So, what's the big takeaway here? On the one hand, you've got this incredibly powerful system that's designed to protect millions of users from malware and bad actors. It's a necessary shield. But on the other hand, for a developer who's just trying to do the right thing, it can feel like this complex and sometimes totally unforgiving maze. The reality, it's probably both. And learning to navigate that maze is just the price of admission to the biggest app ecosystem in the world.
Hey everyone, and welcome. So if you're an app developer, you already know that actually building the app is only half the battle, right? Getting it approved and seeing it succeed on Google Play, well, that's the other half. Today, we're going to break down Google's quality and spam standards to give you a really clear roadmap. Let's dive in. You've poured weeks, maybe months of your life into the code, the design, everything. You are so ready to launch. But before you go and hit that publish button, you gotta ask yourself this one critical question. Because, Google Play isn't just a store. It's a curated ecosystem. And understanding the rules of that ecosystem is absolutely everything. So first things first, we need to kind of get inside Google's head. What do they even mean when they say quality? Well, it turns out it all boils down to one central philosophy that pretty much shapes every single rule they have. And here it is. This sentence right here, this is your North Star on Google Play. It's really worth remembering because every decision you make should be measured against it. But the key phrase, the part that unlocks this whole thing, is engaging user experience. So what does that actually mean in practice? It means your app is more than just a list of features. It's really a promise to the user. It's a promise that it's going to work reliably, no crashing, no freezing. It's a promise that it offers something unique, something they can't just get anywhere else. And maybe most importantly, it's a promise that it provides real value. This idea is the foundation for everything else we're about to talk about. Naturally, this focus on value leads us right into the rules about spam. I mean, nobody likes spam, right? It clutters up the store and it just creates a terrible experience for users. That's exactly why Google is so strict about it. So try to think of these rules not as limitations, but more like a shared responsibility to keep the Play Store a great place to be. The policies break spam down into a few main categories. We're going to zoom in on 3 of the most common ones that developers tend to get tripped up on: message spam, web view spam, and affiliate spam. Okay, let's look at a couple of these side by side. On one hand, you've got message spam. This is all about consent. You just can't send a text or an email for the user unless they see exactly what it says and who it's going to. Then on the other hand, you have web view and affiliate spam. This is all about purpose. If your app's main goal is just to push users to a website to get a commission, that's a huge red flag for Google.
Google gives us a perfect example here, an imaginary app called Ted's Shopping Deals that was basically just a web wrapper for a shopping site. It added zero new functionality, no unique value. It was just a website pretending to be an app. And that's the key takeaway here. Your app needs to be an app, not just a little window to someone else's website. And this whole idea of adding unique value leads us straight into our next big topic, the repetitive content trap. See, Google wants a diverse catalog of apps, not 1,000 copies of the same thing with slightly different icons. This section is all about originality.
The guidance here is actually pretty direct, which is nice. First, don't plagiarize. Simple enough. Second, always add your own spin, your own features, your own original content. And third, this one's really important. If you have a whole bunch of similar small apps, Google's advice is to combine them into one bigger, more comprehensive app. It's really about quality over quantity.
Okay, we've covered philosophy and content, but honestly, none of that matters if the app is broken. And that brings us to functionality. Does your app actually, work? This might seem super basic, but it's one of the most common reasons apps get rejected.
You can almost think of broken functionality as a 3-step failure. First, the ultimate failure. It won't even install. Second, it installs, but when the user taps the icon, crickets. It won't load. And third, maybe it loads, but it's frozen solid. It's completely unresponsive. Any one of these is a total deal breaker. Your app has to be stable right from the very first tap. And it's not just about being broken. An app can also get rejected for having extremely limited functionality. We're talking about apps that are basically just a single PDF file or an app that has only one wallpaper. Or, and this might surprise you, apps that are literally designed to do absolutely nothing. It all comes back to that core principle. An app has to provide value. If it does nothing, it has no value. All right, we have covered a ton of ground. So now let's bring it all together into a final quality checklist. Think of this as your pre-flight check before you submit to Google Play. Here are the keys. Number 1, provide unique value. Don't be a copycat or a simple web wrapper. Number 2, make sure it's technically solid, stable, responsive, and it works. Number 3, respect the user. That means no sending messages without their explicit consent. And 4, it all comes back to that main idea. Create a genuinely engaging experience. And in the end, that's what it all comes down to. As you're putting the finishing touches on your app, just ask yourself this one last powerful question. The Google Play Store is a very crowded place. Is your creation a truly meaningful addition to that ecosystem, or is it just more noise? If you can confidently answer yes to that, you're on the right track. So you've built an incredible app, and now it's time to actually turn all that hard work into a real business. But let's be honest, navigating Google Play's monetization policies can feel, well, a little tricky. You're trying to build a career here, not accidentally break some rule that gets your app delisted. That's why today, we're going to break down the official guidelines into a simple playbook so you can monetize your app the right way. And really, this is the core question for every single developer out there. How do you tap into the massive opportunity of the Play Store without getting tangled up in its really complex web of policies? We're going to break down the key principles so you can build with total confidence. Okay, first things first, getting paid. Google has a really clear set of rules about this, and they all circle back to one key idea. Are you selling something digital, or are you selling something physical? Google's payment policy basically splits the world into 2 simple camps, digital and physical. As you can see right here, if you're selling something that only exists inside your app, we're talking virtual currency, subscriptions, an ad-free version, you have to use Google Play's billing. But if you're selling physical goods like t-shirts or real-world services like event tickets, you actually cannot use it. Seriously, understanding this one distinction is the key to their entire payment system. To make this crystal clear, let's look at what Google actually calls an in-app purchase. It's not just about items in a game, it covers a huge range of digital stuff. Subscriptions for services like fitness or dating apps, unlocking new features in your app, and even cloud software services like data storage. The rule of thumb is if it's digital and you access it through your app, it falls under this rule. And believe me, Google is absolutely serious about this. You are strictly, and I mean strictly, forbidden from directing users to any other payment method from within your app. No little links to your website, no hey, buy on our site for a discount buttons. Trying to get around their billing system for digital goods is probably one of the fastest ways to get your app suspended. All right, let's switch gears and talk about ads, where that same idea of user trust is everything. If in-app purchases are all about fair value, then ads are all about fair presentation. The guiding principle is so simple. Just don't deceive your users. So, what exactly does Google mean by deceptive? Well, it's basically any ad that tries to disguise itself as part of your app's interface or even your phone's operating system. The user has to know, without a single doubt, when they're interacting with an ad versus when they're interacting with your actual app. This is a perfect example of what we're talking about. See on the left, that's the violation. An ad that's disguised as a help icon. A user clicks it expecting, information, but instead they get an ad. It's a classic bait and switch. The compliant version on the right, though, is totally different. It's visually distinct, it's clearly an ad, and that kind of transparency is exactly what Google is looking for. And here's another one you've probably seen a million times. Ads that look like system notifications. You know the ones. They look like a new message or a low battery warning from your phone, and they trick you into clicking. This is a huge no-go. Compliant ads use standard, recognizable formats that don't try to fool anybody. It's all about that trust. Okay, so beyond just tricking people, Google also has strict rules about ads that are just plain annoying or disruptive. The whole goal is to make sure your monetization strategy doesn't completely destroy the user experience.
15. Just remember that number.
When we're talking about those big full-screen ads that interrupt everything, 15 seconds is the magic number. The rule is simple. You cannot trap the user in an ad. After a maximum of 15 seconds, you must provide a clear and obvious way for them to close it. Now, the only exception here is for rewarded ads, where a user specifically agrees to watch longer to get some kind of in-app reward.
And hey, the rules on annoying ads don't stop there. Here's a quick rundown of some other major violations. Ads that pop up in the middle of gameplay or right when a level starts. Totally forbidden. Same goes for ads that show up on your app's loading screen. And absolutely no ads that follow the user back to their phone's home screen after they've left your app. The ads have to stay inside your app experience. All right, let's dive into our last section, which covers subscriptions and a few other special policies. This is where long-term user trust is really won or lost. And honestly, it's an area where a lot of well-meaning developers can get tripped up. This slide really nails the difference. The bad offer on the left is deceptive, right? It advertises a low monthly price, but it's really for a yearly plan, and it tries to hide the auto-renewal terms. The good offer on the right is totally transparent. It clearly states the full price, the billing cycle, and all the terms in the user's local language. With subscriptions, this level of transparency isn't just a good idea, it's a requirement. Now, this is a really fundamental idea you have to get right. A subscription can't be used for a one-and-done benefit. So, for example, you can't sell a subscription that just gives a user 1,000 gems on day one and then nothing after that. It has to provide continuous, ongoing value, whether that's access to content, new features, or ongoing services. If it's a one-time purchase, sell it as a one-time in-app product, not a subscription. Okay, and to wrap things up, let's run through a few final checkpoints that are super important. First, loot boxes. If your app sells randomized virtual items, you must disclose the odds of getting each item before the purchase is made. Second, user choice. You have to respect a user's decision to opt out of personalized ads. And third, lock screens. Unless your app is a lock screen, you are absolutely forbidden from monetizing the device's lock screen. Period. When you step back and look at all these rules together, from payments to ads to subscriptions, they all point back to this one central idea. Google's policies are designed to reward developers who build sustainable businesses on a foundation of trust, not on manipulative little tricks. So as you head back to work on your awesome app, I want you to ask yourself this one question. Is every single payment, every ad, and every subscription offer you have designed to be clear, fair, and respectful to your user? Because in the long run, building that trust is the most valuable asset you have. Let's be real, trying to make sense of the Google Play malware policy can feel, well, a little overwhelming. It's complicated, it's super important, and if you get it wrong, the consequences are pretty serious. So in this explainer, we're going to flip the switch and make it all clear. Our whole goal here is to translate this dense policy into practical, straightforward advice you can actually use. Okay, let's get into it. First up, we're going to talk about the one big idea that drives the whole policy. Then we'll dive into the different kinds of threats Google is on the lookout for, kind of like a zoo of bad code. After that, we'll look at how malware tricks users, and we'll wrap it all up with a simple playbook to help keep your apps safe and in the clear. All right, so first things first. Before we get into all the nitty-gritty about what makes something a Trojan or spyware, we really need to get our heads around the core philosophy. This is the why behind every single rule. And boom, there it is. This is the golden rule. Everything, and I mean everything, comes from this single, simple concept. Keep the user, their data, and their device safe. It's the absolute foundation of trust for the whole platform. Honestly, every single decision you make as a developer should be measured against this idea, because a user's trust, that's your most valuable asset, hands down.
Okay, so that's the why. Now let's move on to the what. Google sorts malware into this whole menagerie of different threats. Getting to know these categories is really the first big step to making sure you steer clear of them.
So the official definition here is incredibly broad. And the most important thing to get from this is that malware isn't just some virus you accidentally write. It's any code that creates a risk. And listen, this is the part that trips up so many developers. You are 100% responsible for the third-party SDKs you use. Think of them as part of your app's supply chain. You're on the hook for every single piece. As far as Google sees it, their code is your code. So what's the end game for these malicious apps? Well, it pretty much boils down to one of these four things: messing with the device's security, completely taking it over, stealing personal info without permission, or just straight up tricking the user out of their money.
All right, let's zoom in on a big one, spyware. This is all about stealing data. It's code that's secretly grabbing user information and sending it somewhere else. Now, the magic words here, the ones you really need to pay attention to, are without a legitimate, policy-compliant purpose. What this really means is that any data you collect has to be for a clear, valid feature that the user actually understands and wants. If you're just collecting data for the sake of it, you're heading straight into the danger zone.
What's so great about this is how it draws such a clear line in the sand. Look, it's totally fine to collect data if you're upfront about it and get clear permission for a feature that actually helps the user. But the second you or an SDK you're using starts sneakily recording calls or sending data in the background, you've crossed the line. And that right there is why you have to vet your SDKs. You've got to know exactly what they're doing, because at the end of the day, you're the one responsible.
Okay, now inside this whole spyware category, there's this one subcategory, stalkerware. And Google treats it with, let's just say, extreme seriousness. These are monitoring apps, and the rules for them are super, super strict.
I mean, just look at this list. It shows you exactly how serious they are. You absolutely, under no circumstances, can market these apps for spying on a spouse or partner. End of story. The app has to show a notification that's always on, it has to declare itself with a special flag in the code, and it can only be for legitimate parental control or managing company devices. When it comes to stalkerware, there is zero wiggle room.
Okay, so we've seen how malware can steal data. Now let's shift gears and look at another huge category: malware that's built specifically to trick users and steal their money. And that brings us to the classic Trojan. The whole idea is a bait and switch. Your app looks like something harmless, maybe a fun little game or a handy utility, but it's got this hidden, malicious part to it. It's the classic wolf in sheep's clothing, doing things the user never, ever agreed to. And a super common goal for these Trojans is what's called billing fraud. Basically, they trick your phone into charging you for things. This usually happens in one of three ways: through unauthorized premium texts, calls to expensive premium rate numbers, or something called toll fraud. Okay, this is where things get really sneaky. Let me walk you through how this WAP toll fraud works, because it's wild. So WAP lets apps charge things directly to your phone bill. No credit card needed. What the bad app does is it puts an invisible web page over whatever you're looking at. So you think you're tapping a play button in your game, but what you're really clicking is an invisible subscribe button. Bam, you're signed up for a recurring charge, and the app even intercepts the confirmation text message so you never see the evidence. Now here's something interesting. An app doesn't even have to be malicious itself to get kicked off the store. It can be what's called a hostile downloader. This is basically an app that looks fine on the surface, but its real job is to install other, much more dangerous apps onto a user's device. It's pretty much just a malware delivery system. And Google's not messing around here. They're very specific. The threshold is just 5%. Think about that. If only 1 out of every 20 apps that your app downloads turns out to be malicious, your app gets flagged. It's a tiny, tiny margin for error. And it just shows you how seriously they take this. Because one of these hostile downloaders can act like a super spreader. infecting thousands of devices in no time. All right, so we've seen the rules, we've seen the threats, which can feel like a lot. So how do you actually stay on the right side of all this? This final section is your practical playbook, your checklist for building great, safe apps on Google Play. Okay, these are your golden rules, your guiding principles. You'll notice the themes here are transparency and consent. Go through all your code with a fine-tooth comb, especially those SDKs. Be totally, completely clear with your users about what your app is doing and what you're asking them to pay for. Stick to the official secure tools Android gives you, and if you find a security hole, fix it immediately. And on the flip side, these are the absolute no-goes, the red lines you just don't cross. Don't try to hide what your app is doing. Don't use sneaky tricks for billing. Don't make it a nightmare for a user to uninstall your app. And definitely don't use techniques like dynamic code loading to sneak in bad stuff after your app is already approved. These are all fast tracks to getting your app and maybe even your entire developer account booted from the store. So at the end of the day, it all comes back to that one core idea: trust. The absolute best way to stay compliant is to always put yourself in your user's shoes. Just ask yourself this one simple question every time you build something new. If your code is as honest and transparent as your users think it is, then you're not just following the rules, you're building a better, more trustworthy app. And that's what it's all about.
So, you're building an app for kids? That's fantastic. It's a huge opportunity. But let's be real, it also comes with a pretty unique set of rules. If you get it right, you can build an amazing, trusted brand for families. But if you get it wrong, you could be looking at an app suspension. In this explainer, we're going to cut through the confusion around Google Play's Families policy and give you what you need to build an app that's safe, compliant, and ultimately a huge success.
You've spent countless hours on your app, right? But here's the question. Have you thought about all the little traps in Google's Families policy? This is way more than just checking a box. It's about protecting what you've built and creating something parents can actually trust. So let's make sure you're on the right side of the rules.
All right, here's our game plan. We're going to break this down into 5 simple parts. First, we'll talk about why this policy is such a big deal. Then, we'll get into the specifics of declaring your audience, actually building the compliant app, and, of course, how to make money the right way. And finally, we'll wrap up with a quick checklist of common mistakes you'll want to avoid. Ready? Let's get into it.
Okay, so let's zoom out for a second. Think of yourself as a gatekeeper of a digital playground. Google provides the space, but you're the one building the cool stuff in it. Your app is a direct reflection of your commitment to keeping kids safe. And Google's Families policy? Well, that's your instruction manual.
And the most important rule in that manual is this: it's all on you. Seriously, Google is making it crystal clear that the responsibility is on your shoulders to make sure your app is safe and follows all the relevant laws, like COPPA and GDPR. This isn't just a friendly suggestion, it's a requirement.
Now let's talk about probably the single most important click you'll make in the Google Play console, declaring your target audience. This is not just some administrative task. It is a critical decision that will dictate pretty much everything about how you build and monetize your app.
You've basically got 2 paths. Path 1, you target only children. This means you're playing by the strictest rules. No tracking identifiers, no unapproved third-party code, period. Path 2, you aim for a mixed audience. This gives you a bit more flexibility, but, and this is a big but, you have to use a neutral age screen and be incredibly careful not to collect data from kids or anyone whose age you don't know.
And look, whichever path you choose, don't even think about trying to game the system. Google has absolutely zero tolerance for misrepresenting your app's audience. They will not hesitate to pull your app or even suspend your entire account. The message is simple: play by the rules or don't play at all.
So you've picked your lane. Now it's time to actually start building. This is where we get into the real nuts and bolts of what a compliant app looks like. Honestly, you should treat it like a creative challenge. How do you make something awesome and fun while staying inside the lines?
We're going to tackle this in 4 key areas. First, the actual content of your app. Second, how you handle data. Third, the third-party code you use. And fourth, some rules for special features you might be including.
Okay, first up, the basics. Your app needs to be more than just a wrapper for a website or a bunch of affiliate links. It has to provide real value, and obviously, the content needs to be appropriate for kids. And I know I sound like a broken record, but you have to be completely honest when you answer every single question in the Play console.
All right, this next one is a huge deal, so listen closely. You absolutely positively cannot collect or transmit any of these persistent identifiers from a child. Why? Because this is the kind of data that can be used to track a kid across the internet, building a profile of them, and that is a massive privacy no-no. Google is drawing a very hard line here.
And while we're on the subject of data, want to know a child's precise location? Nope, can't do it. If your app is solely for children, you are not allowed to request location permission or collect that data. It's a simple black and white rule that's all about protecting kids.
Now think of your app as a house that you're building. You're responsible for everything inside of it, even the stuff you bought from somewhere else. If you use a third-party tool, say for analytics or for logging in, you have to check their terms of service. If their own rules say it's not for use with kids, then you can't have it in your app. Simple as that.
And what if you're building something with some cool bells and whistles? If you're using augmented reality, you need to add a safety warning about, paying attention to the real world. And if it's a social app, you've got to include reminders about online safety and require something like a password, an adult action, before a kid can share personal info.
So you've built this amazing, compliant app. It's safe, it's fun, fantastic. Now for the big question. How do you actually make money from it without getting into trouble? It's a bit of a tightrope walk, for sure, but it's totally possible. The key is to always put the user's experience first.
This right here, this is your guiding star for all things monetization. No tricks, no deception. Try to see it through a kid's eyes. Is it perfectly clear what's part of the app and what's an advertisement? If there is any confusion at all, you're probably doing something wrong.
In fact, Google is super specific about certain ad formats that are just completely banned for kids. Things like ad walls that block everything, ads you can't close after 5 seconds, ads that pop up the second you launch the app, and ads that try to blend in with the game. Just avoid them.
Let me paint a picture for you. A kid is having a blast playing your game. They're right in the middle of the action, and then, bam! A giant ad takes over the whole screen. They can't play, they can't get out, they're just stuck. That's an ad wall, and it's a huge violation.
And then there's this tactic, which is just, well, it's sneaky. A tiny little X button that when you tap it just opens another ad, or an ad that pops up right where you know someone is about to tap to play. That's not just bad design, it's a manipulative tactic, and it has absolutely no place in an app for kids.
And it's not just how you show the ads, it's also what's in them. This list is pretty much common sense, but it's a good reminder of what you absolutely cannot advertise to children. The bottom line is, just keep the ad content clean, safe, and age-appropriate.
And this is a massive technical requirement, so please pay close attention. You can't just plug in any old ad network. You must use one from Google's approved list of self-certified ads SDKs. Why? Because Google has already checked these networks and they've all promised to follow the family's policies. It's an extra layer of safety for everyone.
We've covered a ton of ground, and we are almost at the finish line. Before you hit publish, let's just do one final review to make sure you're not about to accidentally step on a policy landmine. Think of this as your final pre-flight check. Here they are, the top reasons apps run into trouble. Things like having inappropriate content, using banned tech, showing mature ads to kids, or even just having a misleading store listing that says it's for kids when it's really not. Steer clear of these, and you're in a much, much better position.
So that's the Google Family's policy in a nutshell. I know it can feel like a lot, but it's not impossible to navigate. You really do have the power to create something that's not just profitable, but also safe and genuinely good for kids. The only question left is your app ready?
So, you're building for the Google Play Store. That's huge. You get to reach millions of people. But with that reach comes a responsibility to keep the ecosystem safe and trustworthy. And one of the most important rules of the road here is the unwanted software policy. So, let's break down exactly what you need to know to stay on the right side of it and, more importantly, create an app that users love.
Pretty much everything we're going to talk about today really comes back to this one core idea. And it's not just some nice corporate slogan. It's genuinely the guiding light for all of Google Play's policies. If you always keep the user's best interest at the heart of what you're building, you're already most of the way there.
Okay, here's a great way to think about it. Imagine the Play Store is like a giant, bustling neighborhood. The good apps, they're the great neighbors. They add value, they make the community a better place to be. This policy is really all about making sure we don't have any bad neighbors spoiling it for everyone else.
And really, this is what it all boils down to. It's a simple contract of trust. Does your app actually do what you say it's going to do? And are you totally upfront and honest about how it works? If you can confidently say yes to both of those, you've already got the spirit of the policy down.
All right, so let's talk about those bad neighbors. What does it actually mean? Well, in the policy world, there's a specific term for it, mobile unwanted software. It's a bit of a mouthful, so people just call it MUS. Let's dig into what that actually is. So here it is, the official definition. Malware is any software that just breaks that contract of trust we were talking about. Maybe it's deceptive, maybe it messes with the user's phone in weird ways, or maybe it's sneakily collecting data in the background. Basically, anything that harms the user and their experience.
So, what are we actually looking for? Well, these are the classic signs of unwanted software. Think of them as red flags. Is your app promising the world but not delivering? Is it tricking people into installing it? Or hiding what it's really doing? These are the kinds of behaviors that will get an app labeled as MUS.
All right, now we need to talk about 3 really, really big ones. These are the high-priority violations you absolutely have to steer clear of. Getting these wrong is a surefire way to run into serious issues. Okay, so what are they? Ad fraud, hostile downloaders, and imitating system functionality. These 3 are some of the fastest ways to get your app into hot water, so let's zoom in on each one. Okay, let's kick things off with red flag number 1, ad fraud. And look, we're not just talking about a badly placed ad here. Ad fraud is when you're actively trying to trick an ad network into thinking it's getting real eyeballs and real clicks when it's not. It's a huge problem because it completely undermines the ad ecosystem that so many of us rely on. And this is a perfect way to see what's okay and what's not. It's pretty simple, right? Are your ads actually visible to the user? And are the clicks coming from a real person who's genuinely interested? If you're hiding ads or using a script to fake clicks, that's a huge no-no. But if your ads are right there in the open and clicked by real people, that's exactly how it's supposed to work. Next up, red flag number 2. And this one's a little tricky. It's called a hostile downloader. Now, the app itself might not be malicious, but if its main job becomes pushing other unwanted software, other MUWS, then it's a huge problem. It basically becomes a carrier for bad stuff. So you might be wondering, how does Google even decide if an app is a hostile downloader? Well, it comes down to a very specific number, 5%. If at least 5% of all the apps that get downloaded through your app are considered MUWS, then your app gets flagged. It's a really clear, data-driven line in the sand. And that brings us to our third and final red flag. And honestly, this one is a huge deal when it comes to user trust. It's imitating system functionality. See, we're all trained to trust the alerts and notifications from our phone's operating system. When an app or an ad hijacks that trust by pretending to be a system alert, well, that's a serious violation. Let's make this super clear with a couple of examples. A notification from your airline app about a great flight deal? Perfect. That's a core feature of the app. But an ad designed to look like a scary system warning saying you have a virus? That is absolutely prohibited. It's all about honesty. The notification has to be clearly from your app, serving your app's purpose. Okay, we've talked a lot about what not to do. So now let's flip it around. Here's your simple checklist for getting it right, for building an app that's not just compliant, but one that users will genuinely trust and enjoy using. And honestly, this little table here pretty much sums up the whole thing. On the do side, it's all about being transparent, being secure, and giving the user control. And on the don't side, it's about avoiding tricks, disruption, and deception. If you just internalize these simple ideas, you'll be in fantastic shape. So at the end of the day, as you're building, as you're updating your apps, it all comes back to this one simple question you should ask yourself. Are you delivering real, honest value to your users? Because if you truly focus on that, like the policy says, everything else will follow. All right, let's talk about Google Play's policies. For developers, navigating these rules can feel, well, a little like trying to solve a puzzle in the dark. But here's an idea. What if they're not just a bunch of restrictions? What if they're actually a guide to building amazing, trustworthy apps? Let's dig into that. So have you ever downloaded an app that just felt a little sketchy? You know, you've totally been there. You install it and right away something feels wrong. Maybe it's asking for way too many permissions, or it just flat out doesn't do what it said it would. As developers, we're users too, right?
And that exact feeling is what Google Play's policies are trying to get rid of. And that's really the heart of it. The best apps aren't just powerful, they're trustworthy. The entire Google Play ecosystem, with its billions of users and millions of apps, it all runs on one thing: trust. It's like the currency of the platform. When users trust Google Play, guess what? They download more apps, and that means your app. So following the rules, it's not just about dodging a suspension. It's about building a solid reputation for your own success. Okay, let's break this all down into 3 main ideas, 3 pillars. Pillar number 1 is pretty straightforward. Be what you claim. Simple, right? But you'd be surprised how many apps trip up right here. It really all boils down to being honest and transparent from the moment a user sees your store listing to what your app actually does. I like to think of your store listing as a promise you're making to the user. I mean, your title, your icon, the screenshots, that description, it's all setting an expectation. So the experience they get inside the app, it absolutely has to match up. What you see has to be what you get. Okay, let's look at a super clear example of this. On one side, you have Photo Editor Pro. It's descriptive, it's honest, totally fine. But on the other, Official Photoshop app. Whoa, that's a problem. That's a misleading claim, right? Unless, of course, you actually have permission from Adobe. That one little word, official, carries a ton of weight, and you really can't just throw it around. So Google has a bunch of red flags they're always watching for. Some are kind of obvious, like claiming your app has impossible features, an X-ray vision app or something. But others are a bit more subtle, like designing your ads to look like system warnings, or trying to hide who's really behind the app. Oh, and a big one. Apps that help people create things like fake IDs or passports? Yeah, that's a definite no-go. And this quote from the policy itself, it makes one thing crystal clear. You can't just slap a label on your app that says prank or for entertainment purposes and think you're off the hook. That's not how it works. The so-called prank app loophole, it just doesn't exist. If your app is designed to be deceptive, it's against the rules. End of story. All right, on to our second pillar. If pillar 1 was all about respecting the user's intelligence, this one is about respecting their personal space. And by that, I mean their device, their data, their privacy, the whole shebang. So what exactly does Google mean when they say personal and sensitive user data? Well, it's a pretty broad definition. You've got the obvious things like location and contacts, but it also includes access to the camera, the microphone, your SMS and call logs, and even the inventory of other apps you have installed. All of that stuff is considered a user's private space. Now, to get access to any of that, you need the user's explicit permission. And it's a very specific 2-part process. First, you need what's called a prominent disclosure. Basically, you have to tell them, right inside your app, what data you need and why you need it. Then, you can ask them to actually agree, by tapping accept or checking a box. You can only access that data after they've said yes. And for some permissions, the bar is set really high. Take a look. If you want to access someone's SMS or call logs, your app has to be the one they've chosen as their main app for texting or calling. For background location, it has to be for a core feature, something the user actually expects, not just to track them for ads. And for all files access, that has to be absolutely essential for your app to even work. And this next one is a huge deal. It's a hard and fast rule. You can never sell personal or sensitive user data, period. Trading that information with someone else for money is completely forbidden. There's no wiggle room on this one at all. Respecting the user also means respecting the integrity of their device. This means a few things. You can't push your own updates outside of the Play Store, you can't download and run executable code like .dex files from some other server, and you have to play nice with other apps. That means no messing with their functionality or their ads, and definitely no trying to get around Android's built-in security features. Okay, that brings us to our third and final pillar: keeping the ecosystem healthy. This one is all about our shared responsibility as developers. It's about working together to make sure the Android platform stays modern, secure, and works well for everybody. You've almost certainly run into the Target API level requirement. I know. It can feel like a chore having to update your app all the time. But there's a really important reason for it. Every new version of Android introduces critical security and privacy updates. So forcing apps to stay current is how Google protects the entire user base from old security holes. So how does this actually work? Well, it's basically a ticking clock. When a new Android version is released, the countdown begins. Any new apps or any updates to existing apps have 1 year to meet the new API level requirement. But what about older apps that don't get updated?
They get 2 years. After that, they'll no longer be available to new users with modern devices. It's this rolling deadline that pushes the whole ecosystem forward. Okay, let's wrap this up. When you look at all these policies, it's really easy to just see them as a bunch of obstacles you have to jump over. But let's try to look at it differently. What if we stop thinking about trust as just something you get from following the rules and start thinking of it as a core feature of your app? Think about it. An app that's totally honest, that respects its users' data, and that's built on a secure, modern foundation, that's not just a compliant app. It's a better app. It's the kind of app that people stick with, the kind that builds a great reputation. And that kind of commitment to your users always pays off. So I want to leave you with this final thought. The question isn't just, is my app compliant with the rules? The real question is my app earning the trust it needs to succeed? Because honestly, in this super crowded world of Google Play, that trust might be the single most important feature you can ever build. Thanks for tuning in. All right, let's get right into it. If you're a mobile developer, you already know that third-party SDKs are honestly lifesavers. They save you a ton of time, they let you add incredible features, and they let you really focus on what makes your app special. But, and this is a big but, there's a hidden responsibility that can put your whole app on the line. So today, we're going to pull back that curtain and talk about SDK compliance. So let me just ask you, straight up, are you 100% sure you know what every single SDK in your app is doing? In the background, what data it's touching, what servers it's pinging? Because I'm telling you, what you don't know can absolutely come back to bite you. I want you to think about it like this. Your app is your house, right? You built it, you own it, you're super proud of it. Now, when you integrate an SDK, you're basically giving a key to a contractor. You're saying, hey, come on in and install some new features. But what happens if that contractor tracks mud all over your carpet, leaves a window open, or does some shady wiring behind the walls? Who's responsible? It's you. It's your house, after all. And look, this isn't just a nice little analogy. It's actually the very core of Google Play's policy. When it comes to your app, there's absolutely no gray area. The buck stops with you and only you. And there it is, right from the horse's mouth. This policy leaves zero room for debate. Just look at that key phrase. You are responsible. That's not a suggestion. It's a direct statement of accountability. The second you put that SDK in your app, their code's compliance becomes your problem, and it's your risk to carry. So let's just boil this all down to one simple, unavoidable truth. The moment you package that third-party code into your app, it becomes your code. Their habits become your habits. And their violations? Well, you guessed it, they become your violations. Okay, so where does this all go sideways? Let's talk about the most common policy red flags. Think of these as the landmines, where a perfectly innocent-looking SDK can cause some serious trouble for your app. Imagine this really common scenario. You just want to add a simple share to social media button. Seems totally harmless, right? But what if the SDK you chose for that feature decides behind the scenes to just quietly slurp up the user's entire contact list without getting the right kind of permission? All of a sudden, your simple little feature has created a massive data violation. And guess whose app is going to face the music? Yours. So, the first big bucket of red flags is all about data. An SDK can suddenly make you non-compliant with the user data policy, it might abuse sensitive permissions you never even intended for it to have, or it could completely break the rules around ads. And this is especially true for apps in the Families program, where the rules for those ad SDKs are incredibly strict. And then there's the actual behavior of your app. This isn't just about privacy anymore. This is about basic user trust. An SDK could have some sneaky code that gets your app flagged as malware, or it could enable annoying, deceptive pop-ups or totally abuse the device's network. All of this happening silently without you ever writing a single line of that nasty code. And this is so important to remember. This is not a complete list, not by a long shot. While these are some of the most common issues we see, the reality is a bad SDK could cause a violation of any Google Play policy. Your job is to make sure you're compliant across the entire board, not just checking off the obvious boxes. Okay, I know that all sounds a little scary, but there is a clear way forward. The absolute key is to change your mindset. You have to shift from just trusting that an SDK developer did the right thing to actively verifying their code and their practices for yourself. So here's your action plan. It's a simple 3-step process. First, know.
Seriously, do an audit. What SDKs are really in your app, and can you honestly justify why each one needs to be there? Second, understand. This is where you do your homework, dig into their documentation, read their privacy policies, maybe even use some tools to see what the SDK is actually doing on the network. What permissions does it use, what data is it collecting, and where is it sending it? And finally, step 3, ensure. This is the last check. Does everything that SDK is doing line up perfectly with Google Play's policies and, just as important, with the promises you make to your users in your own privacy policy?
You know, it really all comes back to this one point. It doesn't matter how many partners you have or how much code you borrow. At the end of the day, you are the gatekeeper for your users. Protecting them, their data, and their trust, that job is yours, and yours alone. So, as we wrap this up, I want to leave you with this one question to really think about. That new SDK you're considering, or the ones you already have in your app, is your blind trust in them really worth risking a policy violation, a suspension, or maybe even losing your users' trust for good? The power to protect your app is in your hands, and it all starts with verification. You know, you should think of the Google Play Store less like a marketplace and more like its own digital nation, a nation with its own laws. So today, we're going to decode that unofficial rulebook, the one every developer really needs to know to not just get an app listed, but to actually succeed.
So what does it really take to make it in this massive ecosystem? I mean, you could have the most brilliant, absolutely bug-free code in the world, but launching on Google Play, that's a whole other ballgame. The reality is, your success hinges on understanding and sticking to a really deep and, frankly, constantly evolving set of policies. These rules are all about creating a safe and trustworthy place for millions of users. And if you don't play by them, well, your app just isn't going to last very long. So in this explainer, we're going to break down 5 absolutely critical areas. We'll start with a new digital economy, then move to handling real-world money, protecting vulnerable users, policing harmful content, and we'll finish up with the creator's playbook for UGC and AI. Okay, let's dive right in. First up, the new digital economy. This is where the cutting edge of tech meets some very, very specific regulations on things like crypto, blockchains, and of course, NFTs. So, before we go any further, let's make sure we're all speaking the same language. When Google talks about this stuff, they use the term tokenized digital assets. Just think of these as unique digital items, like an NFT, whose ownership is logged on a secure public ledger. That's the blockchain. This concept right here is the foundation for all the rules that come next.
Now, when it comes to crypto mining, Google draws a really hard line in the sand. You can have an app that acts like a remote control for mining that's happening somewhere else. That's fine. But what you absolutely cannot do is have an app that mines crypto right there on the device itself. That's a huge no-no, mostly because it just torches the phone's battery and wears out the hardware.
And for NFTs in games, this is all about Google trying to keep games, well, games. NFTs have to have a real in-game purpose that makes the experience better. They can't just be a lottery ticket. That means no wagering or staking them for real money. You have to be totally transparent about what's in any NFT bundle you sell, and you absolutely cannot market your game as some kind of get-rich-quick scheme. All right, moving on from digital assets to actual real-world money. This is an area where, as you can probably guess, Google is extremely strict. All these policies are designed to protect users from sketchy or harmful financial practices.
So if you're building an app that offers personal loans, transparency is the name of the game. You have to clearly state the repayment window, the maximum annual percentage rate, and that includes all the interest and fees, and you have to give a clear, real-world example of what a loan will actually cost someone. No hidden fees, no fine print surprises. But the rules go way beyond just financial transparency, and this is a really crucial point. It's about personal privacy. Google completely forbids these loan apps from getting into the most sensitive parts of a user's phone. I mean, just look at this list. Loan apps are flat out banned from asking for permission to access your photos, your contacts, your storage, your precise location, or your phone numbers. This is a hard and fast rule, and it's all about stopping predatory behavior and data exploitation. Okay, the line on gambling is razor thin. On one side, you have properly licensed, government-approved gambling apps. They're allowed in some countries, but they have to go through a super rigorous approval process. But on the other side, any game that asks you to pay real money for just a chance to win a real-world prize, that's considered unregulated gambling, and it is completely banned. This next section is so important. We're talking about Google's intense focus on safety for its most vulnerable users. The policies around children and health are, as you'd expect, some of the most stringent on the entire platform, and for a very good reason. You know, this quote from the policy itself really says everything you need to know. The stance here is absolute zero tolerance. Any app that endangers a child, promotes predatory behavior, or is used for grooming, it's not just getting removed, it's getting reported to law enforcement. There is no gray area here whatsoever.
And for any app out there that has social or dating features, Google mandates these 4 safety standards. They are not suggestions. You must have public rules against child exploitation. You need an in-app way for users to report problems. You need a process to actually deal with that material. And of course, you have to follow all the relevant laws. That's the bare minimum to even get in the door.
When it comes to health apps, the guiding principle is basically do no harm. You have to be super transparent, fill out the health apps declaration, have a clear privacy policy, and always remind users that your app is not a substitute for seeing a doctor. And on the don't side of things, never make misleading claims and don't ask for health data that isn't absolutely critical for your app to work. And trust me, Google is cracking down hard on health misinformation. This means no bogus claims about vaccines altering DNA, no pushing harmful, unproven cures, and absolutely no advocating for awful practices like conversion therapy. If your app promotes content that goes against established medical science and could hurt people, it will get taken down.
Okay, moving on, let's zoom out a bit and look at the broader rules that govern content and behavior across the entire Play Store. This is really about maintaining a baseline of decency and respect for everyone. Let's be crystal clear. Hate speech is not tolerated. You cannot have content that promotes violence or incites hatred against anyone based on their race, religion, sexual orientation, or any of these other protected characteristics you see here. The goal is to stop the platform from being used as a weapon to marginalize or attack any community. And it doesn't just stop at hate speech. This table gives you a quick rundown of other major restrictions. No realistic, gratuitous violence. No content that promotes terrorism. No apps that help people sell firearms. And no apps that are designed to help sell marijuana or tobacco. These are just hard lines drawn in the sand to keep users safe.
Finally, let's talk about what I'm calling the creator's playbook. If your app lets users create and share their own content, what we call UGC, or if you're using generative AI, then you've got a whole special set of responsibilities. So first off, what is UGC? It's basically any content, text, images, video, you name it, that your users contribute and that other users can see. If your app does this, you are effectively running a platform, and that means you are responsible for moderating what happens on it. And these 4 tools are completely non-negotiable. Your app must have clear terms of use, a way for users to report bad content and bad actors, a function to let users block each other, and safeguards to make sure your payment model doesn't accidentally reward toxic behavior. This is just the foundation of being a responsible platform owner. And that brings us to our final and maybe most crucial question. The policies we've just covered are for the internet of today, but as generative AI gets woven into more and more apps, creating content on the fly, how are these rules going to adapt? How do you govern not just human creativity, but machine creativity as well? That right there is the next big chapter for the Google Play rulebook.
So you've poured months, maybe even years, into building your app. The absolute last thing you want is a takedown notice from Google Play because of some IP rule you didn't even know existed. Well, today, we're going to make sure that doesn't happen. We're breaking down Google's intellectual property policies, piece by piece.
It's a genuinely scary thought, right? A single image, that one logo, or a sound clip you thought was totally fine could be the very thing that gets your app pulled from the store. But here's the good news. By the end of this, you'll have a super clear roadmap to avoid those kinds of mistakes.
Okay, let's start at the very beginning. Look, Google's policy documents are long, they're detailed, but if you strip everything else away, you'll find it's all built on one single foundational rule.
I mean, you can't get much clearer than that. The core idea is just so simple. Don't use what isn't yours. This is the guiding principle for absolutely everything else. But that, of course, raises a big question. What exactly falls under that huge umbrella of intellectual property? Well, this is where it gets a lot broader than just copying someone's code. Google is watching for trademark violations, brand names and logos. They're looking at copyright, that's all the art, music, and text, and it even covers things like patents and trade secrets. Any one of these can trigger a violation.
So let's dig into the area where most developers accidentally get into trouble: copyright. This is all about protecting original creative works.
And this right here is a massive trap. So many developers think, oh, I'll just change the colors on this character, or I'll just remix this song a little bit. But Google's policy is crystal clear. Even if you modify the content, it can still be an infringement.
And just look at how common these kinds of violations are. If you're building an app about movies, it is so tempting to just grab the official poster, right? Or what about a soundboard app that uses famous catchphrases? These are exactly the kinds of things that get flagged, often automatically.
And it doesn't stop with media either. Using a pro sports team's logo, grabbing a celebrity's photo from their Instagram, even creating fan art that's just too close to the original, all of that can get you in hot water. The key word to remember here is indistinguishable. If someone can't really tell it apart from the real thing, you're in that danger zone.
Now here's a subtle but really critical rule. Your app might not contain any copyrighted material itself, but if its main purpose is to help users download or stream stuff they don't have the rights to, that's also a violation. And they'll even look at your store listing and screenshots as evidence.
All right, let's switch gears from copyright to another major area: trademarks. People often confuse trademark infringement with counterfeiting, but in Google's world, they are two very distinct problems. A trademark is all about brand identity. Think of the Nike swoosh or the name Coca-Cola. Infringement happens when you use a similar mark that could confuse somebody into thinking your app is officially connected to that brand when it's not. It all boils down to that phrase, likelihood of confusion.
Counterfeiting, on the other hand, is just flat-out deception. It's not about causing confusion, it's about trying to pass your product off as the real deal. It's making an exact or near-exact copy to trick people.
So here's probably the simplest way to think about it. Trademark infringement creates confusion about whether your app is connected to a brand. Counterfeiting is pure imitation. It's pretending your app is that brand's product. And you can bet both are very serious violations.
Okay, so we know what not to do. But what happens if someone accuses you of infringement? And more importantly, how can you prevent it from happening in the first place? Let's talk solutions.
So, what happens when a trademark complaint comes your way? Well, it doesn't always go straight to Google. The policy actually encourages the rights holder to contact you, the developer, directly first. This is your chance to resolve it before things escalate to a formal complaint with Google.
Now, this right here is probably the single most important piece of practical advice in this whole explainer. If you actually have permission, maybe you've licensed a logo or you have a contract to use certain assets, don't wait for your app to get flagged. You need to be proactive.
So here's exactly what you do. Get your licensing agreements or whatever written permissions you have ready to go. Then you contact the Google Play team before you submit your app. I'm serious, this one simple step can save you from an automatic rejection and a massive headache down the line.
We've covered a lot of ground, from all the copyright traps to the trademark rules, so let's bring it all home with the one piece of advice that pretty much guarantees you'll stay on the right side of the line.
Ultimately, it all boils down to this, and this comes directly from Google's own guidance. When you're in doubt, just don't use it. The safest and honestly the most creative path forward is to build something that is entirely 100% yours.
So as you get ready to launch your next great idea, just ask yourself that one simple question. From the code to the icons to the name itself, is it truly original? Answering that question honestly is the best possible way to protect all your hard work and build something that lasts on the Play Store.
If you're a developer, trust is pretty much your most valuable currency. But one simple mistake, one little oversight, can just wipe it out completely. So today, we're going to break down the impersonation policy, a rule that can literally make or break your app's reputation.
Just imagine this for a second. You need to download your bank's app. You search the store and a couple of options pop up. They all kind of use the right colors, the logos look similar. So which one do you trust with all your financial data? This is that exact moment of confusion and risk that impersonation creates for users every single day.
So you might see one called Official Bank App, and then right next to it, another one called My Bank App, Official. And the icons, they're almost identical. So which one's the real deal? This confusion is exactly what the impersonation policy is there to prevent. And it's not just about protecting users, it's about protecting your brand from getting damaged by copycats.
So, to avoid all that mess, we really need to get what the rule is all about. Let's break down exactly what the impersonation policy says.
Okay, so at its core, the policy is actually pretty simple. Don't mislead users by pretending your app is something it's not. That means you can't pose as another developer, you can't pretend to be some big, well-known company or government entity, or even just another popular app.
And this, right here, this is the golden rule. But notice, it's not just about telling an outright lie. The key word to focus on here is imply. You can't even suggest a relationship or an authorization that doesn't actually exist. It all comes down to the total vibe, the overall impression your app gives to the user.
To really get this rule, we need to look at where developers trip up the most. So let's dissect the anatomy of a fake app by looking at some of the most common ways people violate this policy.
These violations usually fall into 4 main categories. You could call them red flags: your developer name, your app's icon, its title, and any claims you make about it. A mistake in just one of these areas can get you a policy violation, which could mean your app gets taken down or even your entire account gets suspended. It's serious stuff. All right, first up, your developer name. Let's say your developer name is something like Google Official Apps. Well, that clearly suggests you are Google, or at the very least you have some kind of official deal with them. If that's not true, it's a direct violation. The name itself is implying a relationship that just isn't there.
NA, this isn't just about text, right? Visuals are incredibly powerful. Using a national emblem to make your app look like it's from the government, or just copying a business logo to ride on their coattails, both are classic, textbook examples of visual impersonation. Now, here's where it gets a little tricky. It's not always about a straight-up copy and paste job. The policy also covers app titles and icons that are just so similar to other products that a user might get confused. This is a really crucial gray area that you've got to navigate carefully. Here's a perfect way to see it. You can't just go and lift the logo from a popular crypto website and slap it on your app. That's a pretty clear attempt to mislead people into thinking you're them. The better way? Create an original design. Sure, it might feel a little more generic at first, but it's compliant because it's yours. It stands on its own and isn't trying to borrow trust from someone else's brand. We see this happen all the time with fan apps, don't we? You make a fun quiz about a popular TV show, and so you use the show's logo and maybe the main character in your icon. Even if you mean well, you're still misleading users because you're implying an official connection that doesn't exist. And that brings us to one of the most common and, frankly, one of the most easily avoidable mistakes that developers make. I call it the official app trap. Look, the rule here is just dead simple and totally absolute. You cannot use the word official unless you are official. Falsely claiming that status for any person, any company, or any brand is one of the clearest violations there is, and it's super easy for the review process to flag. The policy actually gives this fantastic, super memorable example. You can't just create a fan app and call it Justin Bieber Official. Why? Because that title makes a direct claim. It says you're endorsed, you're authorized. Unless you've actually gotten permission from his team, that title is a clear violation, period. Okay, we've looked at the rule, the common mistakes, the big traps. So what does this all mean for you and your work? How do you make sure your app has integrity and stays on the right side of the policy? It really just boils down to 4 simple ideas. First, be transparent about who you are and who you aren't. Second, be original with your design. Third, be honest in the claims you make. And fourth, be compliant with things like brand guidelines. At the end of the day, it's about building your own brand, not just borrowing someone else's. You know, in the end, this whole policy is really about one thing: trust. So take a good, hard look at your own app, its name, its icon, its description, and ask yourself this one simple question. Are you building your own trust, or are you just trying to borrow it from someone else? Because in the long run, only one of those is actually going to last.
Welcome to The Explainer. Listen, if you're an Android developer, you know the Play Store can be the Wild West. Well, a huge storm is brewing. Google is about to crack down hard on copycat apps, and if you're not ready, your app could literally be suspended. Today, we're going to break down exactly what you need to know to stay safe.
So let's get right to it. The big question on everyone's mind: is your app at risk?
See, Google is targeting what they see as this flood of low-effort, repetitive apps. Come on, we've all seen them, right? Dozens of apps that look, feel, and play almost exactly the same. Well, with the new update to their deceptive behavior policy, Google is finally drawing a line in the sand. We need to figure out which side of it your app is on.
And to really get how big this change is, just look at the before and after here. For years, the playbook for some was pretty simple. Buy a game template, slap a new coat of paint on it, and hit publish. It was a bit of a gray area for sure. But that gray area, it's gone. Google is moving to a much stricter stance, kind of like Apple's App Store has had for a while, by cracking down on what they're calling design spam.
Okay, let's dive into the specifics. Google's whole new rulebook really hinges on this one key phrase, design spam. So, what in the world does that actually mean? Here it is, straight from the source. Design spam is basically Google's catch-all term for what they see as clutter. All those low-effort, repetitive apps that are, let's be honest, carbon copies of something already out there. And notice, it's not just about the visuals, the design. They're talking about features and, crucially, core gameplay.
So what does this actually look like in the real world? Well, as you can see here, two really common business models are now explicitly on the chopping block. First, that whole cottage industry of buying cheap templates and just reskinning them, yeah, Google is shutting that down. And second, and this is the one that might catch a lot of people off guard, directly lifting a competitor's game levels and mechanics is now a clear-cut violation.
Let's make this even more concrete, right? The analysis of this policy change pointed to a genre you've probably seen a million times, the screw puzzle game. You know the ones. So how does this new rule apply when a whole genre is just flooded with super similar-looking games? Now this is where it gets really, really interesting, because this quote right here clarifies a massive point of confusion. This is what trips up so many developers. You might be thinking, hey, I wrote all my code from scratch, I'm totally safe. But this quote makes it crystal clear that Google is looking way beyond your code base. And this just hammers the point home. Your code can be 100% original, you could have written every single line yourself, but if the user experience, the levels, the mechanics, the actual feel of the game is just a carbon copy of another app, you are still violating the policy. It is all about the final product that the user sees, not just the code underneath. So, what does this new App Store landscape even look like? With any major policy change like this, there are always going to be winners and there are always going to be losers. Let's break down who stands to gain and who's suddenly in a very, very risky spot. What you're looking at here is a fundamental shift in who the Play Store is designed to reward. On one side, you've got your clear winners, original creators, real innovators, and game designers who pour time and effort into unique experiences. But on the other side, well, the losers are just as clear. If your whole business model is built on quickly copying what your competitors do or just churning out reskinned templates, the writing is on the wall. Okay, this brings us to probably the most important part of this whole explainer for you as a developer, the actual actionable steps you can take right now to make sure your app portfolio is safe and compliant before the hammer comes down. All right, here's your 4-step survival guide. Think of this as a critical audit for your entire portfolio. First, audit your account itself for any red flags. Second, go look at your marketing and your store listing. No more deceptive screenshots or descriptions. Third, and this is the big one for this new policy, you have to be brutally honest and analyze your gameplay. Is it genuinely distinct from your competitors? And finally, dot your I's and cross your T's on the technical stuff, like making sure your privacy policy is up to snuff.
So when does all this actually start to matter? Is this happening tomorrow, next week, or do you have some time to prepare? Here it is, the key date you absolutely need to circle on your calendar. Strict implementation begins in the third quarter of 2025. This is not some far-off hypothetical problem. The clock is officially ticking, and when that deadline hits, apps and games that get flagged as design spam are going to face suspension, period.
At the end of the day, this is way more than just a new rule. It's a huge statement from Google. By trying to sweep away all the clones, they are making a massive bet that originality and real creativity will finally flourish. And that leaves us with the million-dollar question you see right here. Is this going to work? Could this be the move that finally sparks a new wave of true innovation on the Google Play Store? I guess for developers and users alike, only time will tell.